Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's hearing. Today we're going to continue hearing from Mr. Anketell-Jones. So would you ask the witness to come back into the room, please? Good morning, Mr. Anketell-Jones.
Morning, sir.
Are you ready to carry on?
Yes.
Good. Thank you very much. It's great.
Morning.
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, Mr. Anketell-Jones. First, what I want to do is just follow up on a number of the answers that you gave to my questions yesterday. And you were asked about membership of the CWCT and whether you had attended a CWCT members meeting in October 2014. Do you remember that yesterday?
Yeah. Yes.
And you said, I can't remember what it was on or whether it was CWCT or not. That's what you said yesterday.
Yes.
Now, in fact, what we can see from the documents, we think, is that you did attend a CWCT AGM and members meeting on the 7th of October 2014, at which Mr. Jonathan Room of Celotex was also present. I want to just pull up a document. This is CEL 401037. CEL 401037. Is it coming up on the screen?
Well, we've got it on the screen, but...
It's not on my screen, sorry. My screen is blank.
Right. Perhaps we should get that sorted out. Have you got it?
Sorry, can you see?
You've got it, haven't you? What? Oh, really? Well, don't get worried about that. So it is.
Do you want to take a break?
Are you still blank?
Yeah, the screen is blank, my screen, so I can't see the document, which
No, well, you can't ask questions.
is a
about
slight
it.
hindrance.
Can't see it.
My memory's good, but not that good.
I'm sorry about this, Mr. Anketell-Jones. We get these occasional, very occasional blips.
It's gone to green. We've got it.
Thank you very much indeed.
Sorry about that. Thank you.
No, I gather you've got it now.
We've got it now. Thank you.
Right, thank you.
So we can see from this document that it says CWCT AGM and members meeting on Tuesday, the 7th of October 2014. Do you see that there at the top?
Yes.
And I just want to identify where you are first. Under the members list on the left-hand side, if we go down to the bottom of the page, we can see, if you look the 7th line up from the bottom, I think there is your name, Daniel Anketell-Jones, Harley Curtain Wall Limited. Do you see that there?
Yes.
And you're also there with Mr. Mark Stapley underneath. Do you see that there, Harley as well?
Yes.
And then if we go back to the, staying with this bottom page, bottom part of the page, can you see there on the right, it says non-member Jonathan Room Celotex Limited. Do you see that there?
Yes.
So this, we think, is the meeting at which you met a member of Celotex, and that would appear to be Mr. Room. Does that sound right to you?
Yeah.
Yeah. And if we look at the top, back at the top of this document for the meeting, we can see that the speakers include second person down on the left, Sarah Colwell of the BRE. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Now, her talk was entitled Fire Testing Experiences, and appeared to go into considerable detail on fire testing for facades, including BS 8414 and BR 135. We have the slides for that talk, and I want to show them to you. If we can bring up CEL 401038. So if we could zoom in to start with on the top half of that page. So we can see there, that top left slide, the talk was called Fire Testing Experiences at the CWCT Technical Meeting. And this seems to be dated the 10th of October 2014, Dr. Sarah Colwell. Do you see that there?
Yes.
And then underneath, we can see the objectives of the talk: incidents, mechanisms of external fire spread, fire testing for facades, interpreting data, and summary and questions. Now, looking at this now, can you remember seeing that presentation at that CWCT meeting?
No, I can't remember seeing it.
This is not jogging any kind of memory in terms of
No.
being present.
I think because I was focused on structural design at that point, that's where the focus of my CPD and continued learning was focused. So without having the basis for a lot of these sorts of subjects, it probably didn't mean as much as the other things. So I can't remember seeing it.
You can't remember seeing it. Do you think you might have been present at the talk and just not concentrating on it because it wasn't your remit? Or are you saying you weren't present at all?
I can't remember. I think I might have been there and not concentrating because it wasn't what I was trained in and not part of my remit.
Just picking you up on that, as a structural engineer, wouldn't you have to have some knowledge of fire risks and of fire performance to perform your role as a structural engineer?
Yeah, of the structural components and what they were required to do in a fire. For the facade, it wasn't required to not melt, and that's basically where a structural and what an structural engineer will look at is if there are any fire requirements from that point of view. Is if there's, sometimes we design facades that are to stop fire from passing from one side of the facade to the other side, like a fire-rated curtain wall. In that instance, the bracketry and things that I'd be designing would have to have a fire resistance, and you might have to specify steel bracketry to make that work. But for a facade like the one that was on Grenfell, there aren't those requirements.
Wouldn't, as a structural engineer, you be interested in whether the facade materials might promote the spread of fire across the walls?
For what I was doing, it was to make sure that it could stay on the building for the time that was required and resist the loads that was required. So you'd be looking at how much the panels weighed.
I see. Can we just look on within this presentation? Section 2 is about what is a facade. If we just go down, further down this page, there's a list there about what is a facade. And then the third topic appears to be examples of external fire spread. And if we go to the next page of the presentation, we can see there's a number of fire spread in building envelopes examples that are provided. There's Knowsley Heights, which is in Liverpool in 1991, Basingstoke in 1992, and then if we go one further down at the bottom of this page, we also then, in the bottom left, have the Irvine, the Garnet Court fire, which I asked you about yesterday. So that fire was referred to in this presentation. I mean, again, these are fairly, they're striking images, aren't they, these pictures of facade fires. Can you explain why you don't remember those from this CWCT conference?
I can't explain why I don't remember. Either I was sitting somewhere else or not sitting in the room, or I don't know.
They're not bringing back any recollection for you of
No.
having attended this. And then if we look at the top of the next page, page 3, we can also see that there's reference to other cladding fires internationally. There's reference to a fire in Dijon, France in 2010, and then a whole list of recent high-rise external cladding fires, including towers in Dubai, the Mermoz Roubaix in France in May 2012, other Dubai cladding fires, a Russian one, Istanbul, Turkey. Again, just in general terms, were you aware that there had been instances of cladding fires internationally at this time?
I don't believe so, no.
You don't believe so?
Well, I'm trying to cast my mind back, 7 years. I can't remember knowing about them at that point.
Can you remember when you did become aware of international cladding fires?
Probably when I went to the MSc in Bath, where they, in the fire course, they covered a lot of these subjects there.
And when would that have been exactly? I know it was after you left Harley.
I think middle of 2016.
Right,
I think.
yeah. And then if we look at the bottom of this page, we've got a section on mechanisms of fire spread, including vertical fire spread. And we can see there, in fact, these are some extracts from the diagrams you get in BR 135 about the mechanisms of fire spread externally. And if you see on that bottom right-hand slide, there's reference there to flames extending 5 to 10 times the original length, so flame elongation. Now, yesterday you said you weren't aware of that phenomenon when you were working on the Grenfell fire. Again, does this help as to whether or not you might have known about that at this time in 2014?
No, as I said yesterday, my knowledge at that time was that you were always trying to stop unseen fire spread so the fire brigade could focus on the fire where it was originating it from.
But the concept of flame elongation was, you were positive that's not something you were aware of, is that right?
No, it was just that the fire could spread behind the panels and they wouldn't be able to see it.
Yeah. And then topic 6, if we go to the next slide, is about fire testing. And in particular, Sarah Colwell has focused on full-scale system tests in this presentation, including 8414 tests, and we get a number of images which give a demonstration of that type of testing. If we can look down again at the next set of slides, there you can see there's reference to the test duration, how long it runs for, what the system is. Do you see that there?
Yes.
And again, is this bringing back any memories in terms of whether you were aware of these system tests? I think yesterday you said you were barely aware that there was an 8414 test.
Yeah.
Does this help as to whether or not you had more knowledge than that in 2014?
I don't believe I did. As I said before, is focusing on the structural design, and on other projects that I worked on, I would always send this information off to the fire consultant because I hadn't had any training in it.
Okay, we'll come back to the fire consultant later. Just staying with this presentation, if we can keep going down this slide, we get more information about the BS8414 test and the testing method. There's a full-scale video clip of an external cladding fire test that appears to have been shown as part of the presentation. We see that in the bottom right-hand corner. And then if we carry on, there's information about what information is recorded as part of these tests, the output from them. And then again, if we can keep going, we get a summary of the classifications of performance, and there's reference there to BR 135 in the bottom left-hand slide. Do you see that there?
Yes.
And we see the front page of the publication. That was the 2013 third edition of BR 135 that's in that bottom slide. So again, does this help as to whether you were aware of BR 135 at this time in October 14?
People mentioned it for, saying that certain things had passed the BR 135 test on other projects, but because I wasn't trained in it, I would always send it off to people who were
Right. Were you aware that BR 135 was relating to a system test like this, a mock-up on a wall, as per these photographs?
No, I don't think I was.
And then if we look at the very bottom of that page 6, there's reference to the failure criteria. We get the failure criteria actually in that top right box. External fire spread, internal fire spread. It explains what the failure criteria are. And then there's a discussion of mechanical performance in the bottom left-hand slide. And it indicates that details of any system burn through, collapse, spalling, delamination or falling debris should be included in the test report. Do you see that sentence there?
Yes.
Now, again, yesterday when I asked you, you said you weren't aware of spalling and delamination as a feature of rain screen performance in fire. Does this help you as to whether or not, in fact, you may have been aware of those concepts?
The only concept I was aware of at that point was that aluminium melted at quite a low temperature compared to steel, and so that in a fire, there's a good chance that the facade could melt and fall off.
Yeah. Now, we've got some information about what Mr. Room's kind of takeaway points were following this day and the day generally. And I just want to look at an email, an internal Celotex email. This is CEL 401255. Now, if we can blow up the top half of that, yes. So this is not an email you would have seen at the time. This was an email from Jonathan Room to a large number of his colleagues within Celotex, dated the 21st of October 2014. And he's reporting back and saying, "Hi team, as some of you may know, I recently attended the CWCT members meeting up in London." And then he explains what the CWCT is. And then he explains what the reason for attending was in the next paragraph. And he says, "I met a number of people during the day and I have attached a list of attendees who you may want to follow up." So that was the list that we looked at the beginning this morning. And then he says this in the next paragraph: "The day was a mix of opinion and fact, and a lot of the opinion was pretty one-sided. The use of non-combustible materials only," and he's put those in capitals. "A lot of people that I spoke to afterwards disagreed with a lot of what was said." Do you see that there?
Yes.
So we can see that his takeaway point, or one of his key takeaway points that he's reporting back to colleagues on, is that there should be non-combustible materials only in such facades. Do you see that?
Yes.
Now, can you recall whether that was a point you came away with following that conference? That materials should be non-combustible only?
I can't remember anything in relation to that conference.
Do you remember any discussions about whether people agreed with whether non-combustible materials only should be used? Do you remember discussions during the conference about compliance?
No, I can't.
Were you involved in any such discussions, for example, with Mr. Room?
No, I wouldn't have. I can't remember being there, to be honest, but if I was, I wouldn't have had the knowledge to be able to cast any opinions on it.
After attending an event like this, what would you do, say, with the pack that you get at conference, the slides? What was your practice in terms of reporting back to colleagues at Harley? Was that something you routinely did?
Now when I go to them, the slides are usually sent out by email, and I usually pass them on to my colleagues. Back then, I think because I was not directly connected with them and more focused on structural design, I would leave that to Mark to send them out.
Did you ever check with him that he sent out that material?
I can't remember this conference, so no.
But would you agree, looking at it now, that that was pretty important material for cladding subcontractors, cladding designers to be aware of?
Yes.
If, as you say, your remit was so narrow and limited to structural considerations, can you explain why you were attending a CWCT event of this nature, including such wide-ranging topics?
No, I can't.
Now, just picking up on some other points about your role from yesterday, were you ever provided with a written job description while you were at Harley?
I think probably when I very first started in my first role, there would have been a job description that I was applying for, but not to my knowledge after that.
So when you were promoted to the role of design manager, do you recall getting a revised job description setting out your role?
When that happened, we had some more designers in the office, and Mark Stapley was my line manager. When there became more designers, needed to have a way of trying to keep a track on their program and making sure that they were keeping to their programs. So it was my responsibility to do that, but it was never any more formally discussed than that.
I see. Now, Mr. Bailey's evidence was that Graham Hackley left Harley at the end of 2012 and beginning of 2013. And you said yesterday that you weren't made technical manager until the end of 2015, beginning of 2016. Can you help us as to who fulfilled the role of technical manager at Harley for the period between 2013 and 2015?
There wasn't one.
Who at Harley had responsibility during that period for ensuring that the designs of cladding systems complied with the building regulations?
For the projects that I worked on, I would always pass it back to the client and the design team working under the client for them to confirm. So I'd send them the drawings to check on the responsibility to make sure that happened in the business as a whole. I would think would fall to the directors.
So on the Grenfell project, can you help us as to who that was? Who were you passing it back to? Who was the design team that you were asking to check for compliance?
I wasn't passing it back to anyone because I wasn't producing any of the design. For the structural design, I would pass it back to, I can't remember who was in Ryden at the time, and ask that it was verified by their structural engineer.
So who was producing the designs for Grenfell, and who was that being passed back to?
So Kevin was producing the designs, and he would have been passing that back to Ryden and their design team.
I see. Now, I want to look at a passage from the transcript yesterday.
Sorry, just to interrupt you for a moment.
Yeah.
When you say passing it back to Ryden and their design team, who did you understand to be Ryden's design team?
I think at the time my involvement was so limited that it's only from looking back on it now, but I always understood that there was an architect, a fire consultant, building control, who would have been the client's design team.
Thank you.
Why do you say building control was part of the design team? Was that building control's role?
I think quite often building control inputs into design and checks design. They don't report to Ryden, but even in the past, sort of 3 years, building control usually are shown a lot of the design in the process for them to comment on and to confirm that it complies.
And that was your understanding at the time, was it, that building control were part of the design team?
My understanding at the time would have been the same as all the projects that I had worked on, was that our client would be passing that information on to building control to check. But yeah, building control wouldn't be reporting to the client.
They wouldn't be reporting to the client, did you
No.
just say? Okay. Just going to something else from the transcript yesterday, if we can pull this up. So this was day 35, page 202, line 10. So I was asking you there, were you aware that it was part of Harley's responsibility to consider the need for effective fire barriers? And this is where I was asking you about the curtains consulting specification that had been included in Harley's subcontract. And you say this: we would have known that we needed to put fire barriers in, we just wouldn't have known necessarily where they needed to go. We've relied on the fire consultant to tell us, as with other projects I had worked on. Now, I want to ask you, what steps did you or Harley have in place that you were aware of to ensure that you got full advice from the fire engineer on the Grenfell project?
On the Grenfell project, I couldn't tell you. On other projects, I would always make sure that I had sent the fire break elevations to them, and that I'd always had confirmation back from the fire consultant that he was happy with what was shown.
And why couldn't you tell us whether that happened on the Grenfell project if you were the design manager for the project?
Because I was just making sure that Kevin was keeping to programme, and occasionally he'd send me things that I'd pass through to Ray to check as well. But I think that was only at the very early stages. Later, once I was, just having to keep up with my workload on other projects, I think Kevin just went directly to Ray.
Kevin went directly to Ryden?
Ray, sorry.
Ray, oh, I see. Was Kevin ever told, you need to make sure you've got proper fire engineering input for your designs, this is who you go to? Did you ever have that discussion with Kevin?
No.
But you were line managing him at the time, is that correct?
I think that at the beginning I was for a couple of months, and then I was told to focus on other projects. So I had to keep up with the likes of the Trinity Square project, and once there was a project manager appointed, he would have been reporting to him.
I see. Well, I'm going to come back a little bit later and just have a look at the extent to which you were inputting into supervising Kevin Lamb. So we'll park that for now. Just on the CDM regulations now, what did you understand your duties under the construction, design and management regulations to be during the Grenfell project?
At that point, I wouldn't have had any understanding.
Were you aware that as a designer, you would owe duties to your client and duties when preparing or modifying a design under the CDM regulations?
Not under the CDM regulations. I would have realised that there was a duty to keep them informed and get things approved, but that was mainly to do with other projects.
Did you ever have an awareness on the Grenfell project that you would be categorised as a designer under the CDM regulations?
Not on the Grenfell project, no.
Were you ever involved in any design risk analysis or design risk assessments as part of a CDM process on the Grenfell project?
Not on the Grenfell project, no.
At the time of the Grenfell project, did you have an understanding about the health and safety file under the CDM regs and what was required in relation to that?
Not on the Grenfell project, no.
Did you understand that Harley would have to make significant contributions to that health and safety file under the CDM regulations?
Not on the Grenfell project, no.
When you say not on the Grenfell project, have you become aware at a later stage of your obligations under the CDM regulations?
Yes.
Yeah. Was that when the new regulations came in 2015, or was that after that?
No, that was in training that I've had after leaving Harley.
I see. Did you have any training with Harley about the CDM regulations?
No.
Now, the next topic I just want to explore is to consider briefly what involvement you and Harley had in the design process prior to being formally appointed on the project, yes? And I want to turn to start with to a document ART 401487. And what this is, just to be clear, you're not copied in here, but this is an email from Mr. Soons of Studio E on the 27th of September 2013 to a number of individuals at the TMO, Max Fordham, etc., about the Grenfell project, reporting back on a meeting with Harley Curtain Wall this morning. Do you see that in the first line? It says, we met with Harley Curtain Wall this morning to discuss the project. They are very keen, have been tracking the project for some time. They are specialists in this type of project. They pointed to Ferrier Point as being very similar to Grenfell. And then Mr. Soons has recorded a number of key points arising from that meeting. Do you recall, were you present at any point during that meeting?
No.
No. Now, it would appear that potential costings were discussed at that meeting. You can see from point 2 and indeed point 1. Do you remember ever being involved in discussions about costings prior to the appointment?
No.
Can we now turn to a document later in time, November 2013. This is HAR 406011. Now, this is an email, if we blow it up, from Mark Harris on the 7th of November 2013 to Thomas Reck at Studio E, but copying in Ray Bailey and Mike Alverston and others, Bruce Soons, Mark Harris at Harley. You're not copied in here. And in the bottom paragraph of that email, Mr. Harris says this in the second sentence of that last main paragraph. I have to say, from a Harley selfish point of view, our preference would be to use ACM. It's tried and tested on many Harley projects, and we are confident in the cost base. And that said, we are, of course, an envelope contractor, would be happy to clad the build in the material of choice. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Did you, at the time, share that preference for ACM? Would that have been your preference as one of Harley's designers?
I would always go with what had been specified by the architect. I didn't have any preference at all.
Did you know that your colleagues at Harley were expressing this preference at the time?
No.
You weren't aware of that at all? Were you aware that Harley was closely involved in the selection of the Rainabond cladding panels?
No. From my point of view, it was in the specification and it had been specified by the architect.
Can we turn now to an email again later in time? We're jumping forward to April 2014 now. This is HAR 405711. And this is an email of the 25th of April 2014. So if we start actually with the email at the bottom of that page from Kai Fabionke of Studio E to Mark Harris. Do you see that there?
Yep.
And in that email, we can see what he's doing is attaching some initial drawings of how he would like the cladding to look. So he says, hi Mark, as discussed earlier, please found a couple of 3D images showing the detail we would like to achieve on the ACM rain screen panels. And then he goes into some detail about the column casings and then the spandrel panels. And then if you look at the second and third last paragraphs on page 1, he asks, 3 paragraphs up there from the bottom, could you please let us know if this could be done using the secret fixing system or if it has to be face fixed rivets? Would both fixing systems be within budget? And then he asks, if face fixed, what would the vertical centres of the T-rails and horizontal centres of C-channels need to be? If secret fixed, what would the vertical centres of the supports need to be? Do you see that?
Yes.
And then scrolling up to the top email, and this is an email that you are copied into. So this is back from Mark Harris to Mike Alverston, copying you in. So this is an internal Harley email saying, on the 25th of April 14, Mike, can you save to the file? Our Dan will be taking a look at these on Monday. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Now, that's going to refer to you, isn't it, our Dan, there, because you're copied in to the email? Is that correct?
Yes.
So at this stage, were you the person within Harley with the design knowledge to provide answers to the sorts of queries that we saw in that email?
From a structural point of view, yes, and from a fabrication point of view.
I see. But again, do we ever see you saying, I'm only looking at this from a structural point of view? Did you ever say that back internally to your colleagues within Harley?
At that point in my career, it was the only training that I'd had. I had no other training in other areas that would make me be able to make any comment on it.
So you think it was implicit that you wouldn't have been able to advise any more broadly than that?
Yes.
Yeah.
This would have been looking at how this would work structurally and whether it could actually be fabricated into those shapes that they were asking for.
Yeah. Did you give any consideration to whether ACM was a viable option that could be used instead of zinc for the cladding?
As far as I was aware, it was only ACM. That is what I've never thought any differently.
So you were never aware that zinc was being considered for this project?
Not that I can remember, no.
Had you or Harley ever done any assessment to determine whether the ACM was a compliant material choice for Grenfell Tower?
I wouldn't have been responsible for looking at that.
Who do you think might have been within Harley?
At that point, I would have thought everyone would have assumed it had been done by the consultants, and it would have been done, as part of the tendering process. I don't know really.
At the point at which Harley became involved in the project and received the employer's requirements, including the NBS and drawings from Studio E, did you or anyone else at Harley take any steps to investigate the work that Studio E had done?
No.
Did you simply adopt the work that Studio E had done and start detailed design, or did you interrogate the work that Studio E had done in order to check it for compliance?
We would have adopted it on the basis that they had done all the checks beforehand.
Yeah. Now, moving forward again in the chronology, this is May 2014. If we can go to HAR 405786. So if you can blow up that top email. So this is Mark Harris, 29th of May 2014 to Deborah French, copying and others, and you are copied into this email. And Mark Harris says, "Hi Deb, we'll need your assistance when you get back from Hulls, see attached." And there's a mock-up draft in the attachments. And then they say, "We had a very positive meeting on site yesterday with the Ryden team and the architect. Ryden are coming to us on Monday the 9th of June to talk about the contract. Is it possible for you to provide a response?" Do you see that there?
Yes.
Were you present at that meeting on site? So if it was yesterday, per the email, it would have been on the 28th of May 2014 with Ryden and the architect. Do you recall whether you were present?
At that point, I was not ever involved in any estimating or work winning. It wasn't until 2016 that I started to make that move across. So no, I don't believe I was.
You don't have any recollection of going to site in May 2014?
No.
And as we just noted that Mr. Harris attached as a mock-up to that email, were you ever provided with that mock-up? Sorry, you're copied into it. Did you ever look at that mock-up? Sorry.
No.
Now, if we go to HAR 509768, again, moving forward in time, this is now the 6th of June 2014. Sorry, HAR 50978. Yeah. So this is an email from Mark Harris at the top of the page to Mike Alverston, CCing you on the 6th of June 2014. And we can see that what Mark Harris has done is forward an email from Simon Lawrence sent on that same day, which is below. Do you see that there?
Yes.
And what Lawrence has done in that email is to clarify conversations between us all and put some action points into that email. And I want to look at the third bullet of this. He says, Bruce to send Harley drawing AutoCAD file of the mock-up draft so Harley design team can turn into working drawing. This is then to be approved by Bruce. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Now, is Mr. Harris forwarding you that email at the top because you were part of the Harley design team at this time?
I was part of the Harley design team. I don't know why he's forwarding it, though.
You were part of the design team, but you don't know why he's forwarding it?
No.
Why are you puzzled as to why he was forwarding that email if you were part of the design team?
Sorry, the question was he forwarding it to you because he was part of the design?
Because you were part of the design team.
Yeah, I was part of the design team, but I don't know why he was sending it to the design team.
I don't understand. Why don't you know why he was sending it to the design team?
So Harley design team turn into working drawing. Okay.
So Bruce is to send the Harley drawing AutoCAD file of the mock-up so the Harley design team can turn into a working drawing. So he's recording a number of actions, and this one is an action for Studio E to send the Harley AutoCAD file of the mock-up to Harley.
Yes.
And then Mark Harris is making, if you could look at the top of the page to the email, it's just forwarding it. Sorry. We've just lost that. If we go, yeah, if we can look at the top of this page, what's happened is Mark Harris has sent it to Mike Alberston and has CC'd you. And so my question is, I think you've answered, you were part of the Harley design team at this time, yes?
Yes.
But just one more time, why did you not understand why this was being forwarded to you?
I think I just was not reading it correctly.
Okay. Do you know whether the Harley design team considered the combination of the exterior components of the external facade at this point in terms of their compliance?
I don't believe so, no.
And why would that have been? Why not?
Because it wasn't a one job yet. I don't think that we were probably getting requests from Mark Harris to look at this or look at that. You know, look at the structural design, look at producing a mock-up. You know, we were just responding to his requirements.
I see.
We weren't having an overall look at it yet.
Did the Harley design team consider fire performance and compliance with fire safety standards at this point?
No.
Let's turn on then later in time to August 2014. If we can go SEA 3011681. This is an email dated the 27th of August 2014 from Neil Crawford to Kevin Lamb and Simon Lawrence, and you're copied in together with Bruce Soons. Do you see that there at the top?
Yes.
And although you're only copied in, can you see that it's addressed to Kevin and Daniel in
Yes.
that first line? So it appears to be addressed to you. Do you agree?
Yes.
And we can see that he's proposing a call with the two of you. So Kevin, Daniel, following my initial observations, I've expanded the comments slightly and marked up the drawings attached, as I think this will be easier to discuss over the phone with the comments in front. We'll call tomorrow morning to discuss as agreed. Regards, Neil. And we can see that the subject is Grenfell Tower preliminary cladding drawings for comment, and attached to that are preliminary drawing set comments. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Now, can you remember, did that call go ahead with Mr. Crawford following this email? Sorry, he says he's going to call tomorrow morning to discuss. Do you remember that?
No, I don't. I don't remember really speaking to Neil at all. So I don't know if he liaised directly with Kevin.
So you don't recall ever speaking to Mr. Crawford during the Grenfell project?
I don't recall, no.
Did you ever meet with him face to face?
I think towards the end of 2014, I went to one or two design meetings. He may have been present there.
As the design manager, were you providing design input in order to progress the project at this stage? So this is 27th of August 2014.
No, I wasn't providing any design input. I was basically making sure that Kevin was keeping to programme and making sure that Ray was happy with what he was producing.
Did you ever have a discussion with Mr. Crawford or anyone else at Studio E about whether Studio E considered it their responsibility to check the drawings of the facade for compliance with the building regulations?
No.
Did Mr. Crawford or anyone else at Studio E ever say to you, we're only checking your drawings for architectural intent, i.e. we're not checking for compliance?
No.
Did you ever tell anyone at Studio E that you or anyone else at Harley, including Kevin Lamb, were taking responsibility for checking that the drawings were compliant?
No.
And what was your understanding at the time of whose responsibility that was on the project?
As with the other projects, I would have assumed that was the responsibility of the architect to make sure that the design was compliant and the building control to check that design to sign it off.
What about Ryden? Did you understand that Ryden were checking the designs that Harley produced?
No, I didn't.
You didn't understand they were doing that?
No.
So did you have a positive awareness that they were not checking them?
I didn't have an awareness that they were or weren't. It just would have been normal for the architect to be checking them and building control to be signing them off.
Now, if we turn to paragraph 12 of your witness statement, this is HAR 30010149 at page 3. There, what you do in that paragraph is you explain what the different RIBA stages of work were. You're explaining it by reference to the new RIBA stages, which are numbered, as opposed to the old ones, which were letters, A, B, C, D, if you remember. And I just want to look at what you say at the very bottom of that paragraph in the last 3 lines. You say, therefore, the Harley project designer would have nothing to do with concept design, material selection, or positioning of the components. Do you see that there?
Yes.
But would you accept, based on the exchanges I've just shown you, that this is not correct and that, in fact, on the Grenfell project, Harley did have a significant input into the concept design and material selection, including prior to its appointment?
Can we go back to those documents?
Well, it's where I was showing you about Harley expressing a preference for ACM material, which was one of the alternatives in the NBS specification. Do you accept that Harley played a significant role in terms of the choice of that material?
I think at the time I wasn't aware of that.
I see.
So I couldn't say that they were having any effect on the concept design.
Can I ask you to look at Kevin Lamb's witness statement at paragraph 63? This is HAR 30010419 at page 16. If we can blow that up. So in this paragraph 63, sorry, if we just could look at the top of the page. Yeah, thank you. In this paragraph, he's explaining about how the infill panels, the window infill panels, came to be selected. Do you know what I mean by that when we talk about infill panels? They were the the white panels in between the windows, or the panel which housed the extractor fan in the kitchens.
Okay.
Do you recall that?
Not really, but
Okay.
I understand your explanation.
And he says this in the very end of that paragraph: the use of the Kingspan TP10 for P2 was my decision, as I have used this product over many years without issue. Now, the P2 panel was the one that housed the kitchen extract fan for the kitchen windows. You see him saying that there?
Yes.
The use of the Kingspan TP10 was my decision, as I have used this product over many years without issues. Now, before I ask you any questions about that, I just want to show you another document. This is a copy of the Harley specification. If we go HAR 403866. So this was the Harley specification notes for the external wall. And what we can see is we've got some text, and then we can see someone's put some red annotations on it. Do you see that there?
Yes.
And if we focus on the left-hand side, we can see that for the glazing P1 panels, they're the main window infill panels. The original author has put the core 24 millimetres of Kingspan TP10 rigid insulation. Do you see that there?
Yes.
And somebody has then annotated in red 25 millimetre styrofoam next to that. Do you see that there?
Yes.
And also for the P2 panel, there's a comment as above. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Now, are you aware that the red handwriting was Mark Stapley's handwriting?
I wouldn't be able to say whose handwriting it was.
So our understanding is that Mr. Stapley made these annotations in red for the styrofoam panel. Now, just looking at that and assume I'm right on that and that this is Mr. Stapley's writing, and bearing in mind Kevin Lamb's evidence that he specified the TP10, do you agree with me that some decisions as to what materials to use in the facade were being made by Harley during the project?
If that is by Mark Stapley, then yes, I'd agree with you.
And the Kevin Lamb, the choice of the TP10 insulation originally? Do you agree that was Kevin's decision to use that product?
I wouldn't know whose decision it was, but I would have thought all the materials should have been selected from the MBS specification.
But do you agree that that's an assumption that you're making, and that we actually need to look closely at the documents to tell us, in fact, who was selecting the materials?
Yeah, the statement from Kevin is saying that some materials were being selected by members of Harley.
Well, by him.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he was the project designer, wasn't he?
Yes.
Now, I want to ask you some questions now about the appointment of Kevin Lamb. Now, if we can go to paragraph 10 of your statement first. This is HAR 30-10149, page 2. And there you say this. You say, in respect of the Grenfell project, I was temporarily made lead Harley contact for Ryden, the main contractor, at the end of July, beginning of August 2014. This was because no one else was available. Ryden was told I was the project designer. However, this was only intended to reassure them whilst a project team was pulled together. My primary role was to appoint an external designer, as I did not have the capacity to take on the project. And then you say it was not unusual for Harley to bring in external designers to work on projects where there was not enough internal design resource, and this happened on a number of projects. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Now, just going back and looking again at that paragraph at the bottom of the previous page, I just want to ask you about the phrase you've used there. This was only intended to reassure them, i.e. Ryden, whilst a project team was pulled together. Can you explain exactly what you mean by that?
I think they wanted to make sure that there was somebody in Harley who was available to work on the project.
Ryden did.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you remember who was it at Ryden that wanted to know that?
No, I don't. This was, Mark Harris was dealing with Ryden fully, and just needed to put a name against the project.
And so far as you were aware, did it in fact have the effect of reassuring Ryden? Did Ryden appear to you to be comforted by the fact that you were being named as the project designer?
I had very little to do with them at that point, so I don't know.
Now, if we can then look at an email from Mr. Harris dated the 31st of July 2014 to Simon Lawrence at Ryden. This is HAR 405916. So if we can blow up the top of that page. So this is Mark Harris to Simon Lawrence, copying in a number of individuals, Harley and Ryden, and you are copied in here. We can see that. And he says, "Hi, Simon. Lead designer will be Dan Anketell-Jones, with brother Sam coordinating in the drawing office. We are yet to appoint a project manager, but Rob will advise on this in due course." Now that we are officially underway, could I suggest that emails regarding the design phase are sent to Dan, but copied to Rob and Sam, and then I will deal with the commercial items with Zach. Do you see that there?
Yes.
So do you agree that this told Ryden that you and Sam would be involved with the design of the facade?
Yes.
And you would be the lead designer?
Yes.
Was that your understanding at the time, that that would be your role?
No, I was under the understanding that it was literally just a temporary stopgap because I was far too busy on another project.
And was that because Harley didn't have the adequate design resource at the time to cover the Grenfell project?
Yeah, which is why we brought in external resource.
Yeah. Can you remember how long it was before you appointed Kevin Lamb? He said in his statement he was appointed in July/August 14. That's at paragraph 11 of his statement. Can you help us as to when he came on board?
I think it was almost straight away because I didn't have the time to look at it or work on the project. So he had to be brought in, immediately.
So was there a project designer before Kevin Lamb was appointed?
I don't believe anyone did any actual design work before Kevin started.
Right. Now, if we go to another email a little bit earlier than this, just to see the backstory to this. This is HAR 406153. And if we go, this is an email chain from the 19th of June 2014, but I want to start with the email at the bottom of page 1. So Mark Harris, we pick that up at the bottom, Thursday the 19th of June, Mark Harris to Rob Maxwell, copying in Ray Bailey. And then if we go over the page to the top of page 2, we can see that he's saying, "Rob, to keep you in the loop, contract stuff is starting to hit us now on the Grenfell Tower front. Some of the items below and attached are for estimating." See that there in the first paragraph?
Yes.
And then he says, "However, there are many items which need looking at by our proposed Grenfell House construction team, and therein lies the problem. We don't have one." Do you see that there?
Yes.
So he's saying he doesn't have a proposed Grenfell House construction team. And then he says in the next sentence, "To say I'm concerned about this is an understatement." Do you see that there?
Yes.
And then the substantive paragraph just before the bottom, "The last thing I want to do is walk away from the job, not least because it would severely damage our relationship with Ryden, and worse still, potentially leave the door open for Tim Lovell and co. However, unless we can gear up and service it, we are doomed to fail." Do you see that there?
Yes.
Now, were you made aware of Mark Harris's concerns at the time? You're not copied into this email, but were you aware how concerned he was about resourcing the Grenfell project?
I don't think so.
You don't think so? Just describe the office at Harley. Is it an open plan office, or is it were you separated out?
At that point, it was there was sort of like two offices, so it was all on one floor, but there were sort of a corridor down the middle.
Right.
And mainly the design team were in one office, and everyone else was in another office, and then Ray had his own office.
I see. So you wouldn't necessarily be aware of what some of the commercial team were saying?
No.
Then if we look at Mr. Maxwell's reply at the top of page 1 of this string, we can see that he says, Mark Harris, copying in Ray Bailey, we need to get an external design team on this now. Do you see that there?
Yes.
I can pull a project site manager within a couple of weeks, and we could use Neil or Ben to attend a meeting. So he's talking there about an external design team. Is this concern regarding resources what prompted you eventually to approach Kevin Lamb as the designer?
I don't know if it was in response to this. I just was told that we needed to get somebody in to design Grenfell. I imagine that the senior management decided that it was better to get in someone external on a contract rather than employ someone new.
Yeah.
So I was just asked whether I knew anybody. We'd had a lot of problems with external design before, but Harley had worked with Kevin. I'd worked for Kevin. We were both confident that he could produce the work that was required.
Is it right that the only external person engaged by Harley subsequently to service the Grenfell Tower project was Mr. Lamb?
Yes.
Now, based on the references in this email string, we saw in the string below this that there was reference to needing a construction team, and in this email he talks about need to get an external design team. Would you agree that the implication in these emails is that a team of people, i.e. more than one person, would be engaged, and that a single additional recruit wouldn't be sufficient to deal with Harley's capacity problems?
Usually one designer can do the detailing work, and another designer can do the fabrication work. Depending on the program, you can make it work with one. I think we decided that, just with Kevin, he could keep that to the program requirements.
Does that mean that if resources hadn't have been an issue, you would have expected to have had 2 designers from Harley working on the Grenfell project?
No, I think it was more to do with the program. I think that if you had enough time, one person could cope with the workload.
Were you satisfied at the time you appointed Kevin Lamb that it was sufficient to just have one designer on the project?
Yes.
You were? Even though you've just said usually one designer can do the detailing work and another designer can do the fabrication work, you were satisfied that Mr. Lamb could do all of that?
I can't remember, but it's the only reason you have somebody doing design and someone else doing the fabrication is because you're really pushed for time on a program. It would appear to me, looking back, that we must have thought that one person could meet the program requirements.
Yeah. Did you think that this issue of design resource was being raised quite late in the project?
I think that it's quite normal to not know until the very last minute whether you're going to get an order or not, and you're never given any warning, that an order is necessarily going to be coming, or at least I wasn't, so that you would literally have to find resource when an order came in.
Yeah. Okay. Now, so sticking with the theme of Kevin Lamb's appointment and looking at paragraph 11 of your witness statement, if we can bring that up, HAR 30010149 at page 3. You say there, I was involved in the appointment of the project designer for the Grenfell project, Kevin Lamb. I had worked for him previously in his company Bespoke Design Services. I contacted him about the job. He was interviewed by others and contracted to work for Harley as the project designer in around July or August 14. Do you see that there?
Yes.
And you've explained already that Kevin had previously worked on projects for Harley. That's correct, isn't it?
Yes.
What was the nature of any projects he had been involved in? And in particular, had he done any residential high-rise projects for Harley before?
My understanding was that he'd helped with the Chalcott's estate project early on with Harley.
Helped in what way? Can you be more specific?
He'd helped with the design at their early stages.
I see. Can you recall what process you went through to ensure that Kevin Lamb was a suitable designer to take on the Grenfell project?
For myself, he was more competent than I was. He'd been working in the industry for a lot longer than I was. And then also he was known by the company. So he understood how to do detailing and he understood how to do fabrication.
I see. Now, you say there as well that he was interviewed by others. Can we just look at Mr. Lamb's statement? This is HAR 30-10419 at page 3, paragraph 13. He says there that he attended a meeting with Ray Bailey, the director of Harley, and you on the 12th of August. And that in advance he was sent some details about Grenfell. And he goes on and explains that at the end of paragraph 14 that they discussed attendance at a design team meeting on site at Grenfell the next day. So it appears that there was a meeting with him to discuss the project, and then he was there the next day on the project. Is it possible that you were mistaken in your statement about whether you actually interviewed him? Do you recall now interviewing him on the 12th of August 2014?
I would have contacted him before by phone. We'd sort of loosely kept in contact since I'd left working for him. So I would have probably called him about the job and discussed it, what was involved, what the programme was, and then would have wanted him to have come in and meet Ray. So I would have seen that as, rather than being, I knew him, I didn't have a requirement to interview him. So
I see.
I saw the interview as being by Ray.
Did it feel like an interview that Ray did with him?
I can't remember this meeting, to be honest.
Do you remember whether any information was sought either by you on the telephone in advance of the meeting or at this meeting about any relevant qualifications that Mr. Lamb held?
No, I don't.
You don't have a recollection of that?
No.
Do you think it's likely that someone would have asked about his qualifications? Knowing
For
Harley.
myself, I always understood that he had a degree in civil engineering, and that he'd worked in the industry for a long time. He'd worked for some of the large facade supplier companies, and he'd had his own business for a long time.
Right. Did you ever discuss with him whether he would be comfortable working on a large-scale facade project without direct supervision?
No.
Did you take into account that Harley would have responsibility for the detailed design of the facade, and therefore it was of importance that Kevin Lamb had the knowledge and experience to undertake this task?
The parts that I believed that we were ultimately responsible for, believed that he was capable of providing.
Did you think that the task he would be engaged in would require a knowledge of the building regulations and associated guidance?
No, because I thought that would be covered by the architect and checked off by building control.
So does it follow that you didn't assess his capability in terms of understanding of the building regulations and associated guidance around external facades?
No, because that would be put back to the people who did have that training.
Now, if we can just look at Mr. Lamb's quotation and scope of works, this is at HAR 30/10415. So this was the quotation that Mr. Lamb came up with to Harley. It's for the attention of you. We see that on the left-hand side underneath the address of Harley, and it's dated the 12th of August. And he says, Dan, further to your email of 7th of August 14 and our meeting this morning, please find below our quotation for design services to the aforementioned project. Do you see that there?
Yes.
And then if we can look at page 6 and the terms and conditions that were proposed under liabilities, we can see point 4, the last point under liabilities. It says all information as supplied by bespoke design in good faith should be checked for errors and general conformity. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Can you help us as to what quality control procedures Harley had in place to ensure that Kevin Lamb's designs were checked for errors and general conformity?
I think from Harley's point of view, he was working as a Harley designer, so the company would have been working on the pretense that he was responsible for it. Wouldn't have done that.
Does that mean there weren't any quality control processes in place to check Kevin Lamb's design work?
No.
No, there weren't.
No, there weren't.
Now, if we can look at another email around this time, SEA 30/11528. This is an email of the 15th of August 2014. So if we can blow this up. Sorry, actually the one I want is at the bottom of page 1 and over from page 2. It's from you to Mr. Lawrence on the 15th of August 2014 at 16:04. Do you see it beginning at the very bottom of that page?
Yes.
And then if we can go over to the top of page 2, and it's CCing in Kevin Lamb and Rob Maxwell. Good afternoon, Simon. Following on from our meeting on Wednesday, I would just like to confirm that Kevin will be the main designer working on Grenfell Tower. Do you see that there?
Yes.
And then you say, we are keen to get on with the design as quickly as possible and therefore will proceed with the champagne cassettes as discussed. We are going to focus on the details around the windows, which will allow us to finalise the extrusion design as quickly as possible. If you could send over the drawings submitted for planning, this would be a great help. We want to be sure all the right specs are on the drawings to start with and get as much signed off and agreed as we can, and then you've signed off on that. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Now, do you agree that you haven't stated in this email that you would be leaving the project or only involved from time to time?
No, I think by stating that Kevin was going to be the main designer, it would have been clear.
The way the email's worded, you then say, we are keen to get on with the design as quickly as possible. We are going to focus on the details around the windows. Wouldn't that have conveyed, or weren't you just looking to convey that there was a design team and you were part of that design team at this time?
I think it was just trying to speak as Harley, not as the design team.
Did you intend to give the impression that you would remain fully involved with the project?
No.
Did you ever explain to Ryden that you would only have minimal involvement in the project going forward?
No.
Why was that not explained?
It was explained to me at the beginning by Mark that it was just a stopgap, and I think that I thought that he would have told that to the client as well.
I see. So you're saying you assumed that Ryden was told that your involvement would diminish. Is that right?
Yes. I didn't see it as my place to tell them that. It would have been up to either Ray or the project manager.
Did you consider that you would be able to carry out your supervisory responsibilities for Kevin Lamb, given that you've said in your statement you would often be dipping in and out of the Grenfell project?
Yeah, because my responsibilities were to make sure he was sticking to programme, and if he wasn't, to try and get some help for him.
Was it ever explained to you that your supervisory responsibility for Kevin Lamb was limited to just the programme?
It was what I did with all of the designers was limited to that. There were designers who were more experienced than me. It was never stated that I needed to be checking any more than their programme requirements, and that the resource was covered.
Did you ever become concerned on the project that Mr. Lamb might be undertaking design work without adequate supervision?
No.
Did you consider that you had adequate and sufficient time to properly supervise the design work on the Grenfell project?
I wasn't supervising the design work.
So nobody was supervising Kevin Lamb?
He would have been reporting to the project manager. He would have been in contact with the managing director and the contracts manager.
But was anyone actually supervising the design work he was doing as the project designer?
He was liaising with the managing director, so I think he would have been seeing his design from that point of view.
Are you seeing Ray Bailey looked over his designs?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Mr. Chairman, I think that's an appropriate moment for a break.
Is that convenient?
Yes, it is.
All right. Well, we'll have a short break now, Mr. Anketell-Jones. We'll come back at 25 to 12. And please remember not to talk to anyone about your evidence or anything to do with it while you're out of the room. All right?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Would you like to give the usher, please? Thank you. Right, 25 to 12.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Yes, would you ask the witness to come back in, please? Right, Mr. Anketell-Jones, all ready to carry on?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Yes, Ms. Grange?
Yes, thank you. I'm going to ask you some questions now about the NBS specification on the project, and then I'm going to turn to the topic of insulation, which will probably take the rest of this morning, just in terms of where we're going. So on the NBS specification, can we turn that up? This is a SEA 50169. This is the NBS specification for the Grenfell project, which form part of the employer's requirements in Ryden's main contract. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Is that a document that you're familiar with?
I'm familiar with it now. At the time, I think I was only familiar with it in a very brief sort of passing.
I see. Let's look at page 63 on within this document. This is section H92, which begins the rain screen cladding section. Do you see that there?
Yes.
And then if we go on to page 64, we can see the introductory parts of that H92 section. Now, is this a section that you would have read in your capacity as design manager on the Grenfell project?
Because I was only looking to manage Kevin's time, make sure he's keeping to programme, I would have only probably looked at this very briefly.
Would you not have been interested to see what products have been specified, what standards have been specified in here by the architect?
Because I had my own other project that I was working on, it would have been only a very brief look at it.
Now, we can see in that top section, which begins to be read with preliminaries general conditions, the second bullet down says the manufacturers noted within this specification are indicative and may be substituted with similar or equal alternatives. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Were you aware, in general terms, of that on the Grenfell project, that the NBS had said, certainly for the cladding, that the specification was indicative and that there could be substitution with similar or equal alternatives?
I think I wasn't aware of this on this one. The only times that I would have been aware of this is if on another project that it was a performance specification rather than a prescriptive one.
Sorry, the only times you would have been aware of this would be on another project that it was a performance specification rather than a prescriptive one. That's what you've just said, yes?
Yes,
So what type of specification did you think the Grenfell project was?
a prescriptive one.
Can we look at the bottom of this page, section 11 there? It says information to be provided with tender. In addition to the cladding specified in the below clauses, submit comparative supply and install costs for the following alternative materials. And we've got Rainabond, Duragloss, and some finishes given there. Alucobond, Spectra, zinc, quartz zinc, panels by VM Zinc. Do you see that there?
Yes,
Were you aware that the NBS specification had a main zinc panel specified, but then had put in these alternatives?
no, I wasn't.
You weren't aware of that?
No.
Do we go back to your answer that you gave previously, that the only product you were aware of for the cladding was the Rainabond? Is that correct?
Yes,
Would you agree, looking at that, that whilst it may be prescriptive in the sense that you've got some products specified there and you've got to do similar or equal alternatives, it's not wholly prescriptive, is it? It's not saying you must use this one product.
as this is at the beginning, I would have thought there was another section later on that said what the product should be. But as this was to be provided with a tender, I would have thought that this had all been done during the estimating stage.
I see. Did you analyse the design that was provided for in the NBS specification and in Studio E's drawings that were provided as employers' requirements for compliance with relevant regulatory requirements, including the building regulations and associated guidance?
No, because I was only responsible for looking after Kevin's time and making sure he's keeping to programme.
Were you aware whether Kevin Lamb did this as the main project designer?
No, I wasn't.
Would you have expected Kevin Lamb to have done that?
I would have expected him to be familiar with everything in here, but I would have expected the compliance of the products with the building regulations to have been done by Ryden's design team and building control.
So is it right that you didn't expect that anybody within Harley would have gone through the process of checking the MBS specification and Studio E's drawings for compliance with the relevant regulatory requirements?
On other projects I was working on, it would always be that those checks had been done by the architect and that building control had signed it off, and on those projects I would check that that had been done.
But on the Grenfell project, is it right that you weren't expecting that anybody within Harley would have gone through the process of checking the NBS specification and the drawings for compliance?
No.
Can we just look at Mr. Bailey's evidence from last week? If we can pull up the transcript, this is day 32, page 51, lines 4 to 13. So I want to pick it up at the fourth line. So this is Mr. Millett saying to Mr. Ray Bailey, just take the NBS specification okay. Did anybody at Harley analyse the materials and products contained in the NBS specification so far as concerned the cladding to check whether it complied with the relevant statutory requirements? The answer, yes. Question, they did. Answer, yes. Question, who was that? And the answer, it would have been Daniel. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Now, can you explain why Mr. Bailey was saying that it was your job to check, and that he understood you had checked the MBS specification for compliance?
I think that the timelines or time frames might be confused, because at this point I wasn't educated in anything to do with these things, so I wouldn't have been able to check. I think he might be confusing that maybe it was after I'd attended more of the MSc and had studied some of these things.
I see. So you think he's mistaken?
Yes.
And you're clear, are you, that you never analysed the NBS specification for compliance?
Yes.
And you weren't aware of Kevin Lamb ever doing that?
No, I wasn't aware of him ever doing that, no.
Can we look at another passage from Mr. Bailey's evidence? Stay with day 32. If we go up to pages 25 and 26. And I just want to pick it up. If we pick it up there at maybe line 11 on page 25. How many of those employees would have been required as part of their job to consider the fire performance of specified materials in relation to any particular project? And the answer is, in terms of what the design office generally do is if the products have a certificate that says they're class naught, they rely on that. So it's anybody working at the design office will look at. Once the certificate's been looked at and the product's accepted, they will use it. We don't look at every product every time. Once it's been used and been signed off, we would use it on another project without. And then there's a right. You refer to a design office. Who was the design office? Or who comprised the design office as at 2013 to 2014? And then the answer, 2013, 2014, it was Dan was in the design office, Mark Stapley was in the design office, and there were another 4 designers in our in-house design office at that stage. Do you see that answer?
Yes.
So that line of questioning began with the question how many of those employees would have been required as part of their job to consider the fire performance of specified materials in relation to any particular project. And it ends up with it being said that you and Mark Stapley, as part of the design office, would have been required to consider that. Do you agree that that was part of your remit in the Harley design office at this time, to consider the fire performance of specified materials in relation to any particular project?
So on the projects that I would be working on, I would always send off the technical information for the materials to get it approved by that particular project's design team and building control. So you would consider it from that point of view, but you weren't educated in to be able to assess it yourself.
I see. And did you do that on the Grenfell project?
No, because I wasn't the main designer. I did that on the projects that I was the main designer on.
So who would you have expected within Harley for the Grenfell project would have considered the fire performance in the limited way you've just explained?
I would have expected it to have been the designer to have checked that the products that were going onto the building had been checked by the architect and building control.
And the designer there, are you referring to Kevin Lamb?
Yes.
Do you ever recall having a conversation with Mr. Lamb that it was part of his job to be checking that the products were compliant by making sure the architect and building control had checked that?
No.
How would Mr. Lamb know that that was part of his job?
From working with him previously and having done that with him previously, I would have expected him to have known that.
Okay. Now, if we can go back to the NBS specification, if we look on page 68 at item 220, so it's SEA 50169 at page 68. And if we look there, so this is still within the H92 rain screen cladding section, and this item 220 is headed specification, and it says compliance standards, the Centre for Window and Cladding Technology, CWCT, and it then says in the second bullet, reference information for the duration of the contract, keep available at the design office, workshop, and on-site copies of the Centre for Window and Cladding Technology, CWCT, standard for systemised building envelopes. Do you see that there?
Yes.
And that standard is actually referred to in several places within this NBS specification. It's also referred later in clause 310. Can I ask you just to turn that up, or can we turn that up now? That's CWCT 5046. This is it. We know it's dated March 2008, I think. Were you aware that the NBS specification on the Grenfell project required compliance with this CWCT standard?
No.
So that wasn't something you picked up from reading the NBS specification?
No.
And it wasn't something you discussed with Kevin Lamb?
No.
Sorry, it's actually dated September 2008, not March 2008. That was my error. Had you ever come across this document at the time of the Grenfell project?
I can't remember. I became very familiar with it during the time of doing the MSc at Bath. I can't remember knowing much about it before then.
Do you recall consulting this document at the time of the Grenfell project?
No.
Okay, I want to look now at the topic of insulation and explore that in a little more detail and the process of selecting the insulation which was used on the tower. If we can start with paragraph 21 of your witness statement. This is HAR 30010149 at page 5. So paragraph 21, you say, I have no specific memory of the design as my involvement in the Grenfell project was rather limited. Most of my time was taken up with working on other projects. And then 4 lines down, you say, from my reading of media reports and review of Studio E and Harley drawings brought to my attention, I can see that it was a traditional rail system with hook-on cladding panels for the rain screen and a phenolic insulation used for the thermal performance. Do you see that there?
Yes.
So does it remain your evidence that you have no recollection from the time about the products that were used and that you only became aware of the products being used from media reports?
Prior to having these conversations and looking at the stuff in the media, I couldn't remember. I wouldn't have been able to recall what was on the building.
And did that apply to the insulation, that you couldn't recall what was on the building in terms of insulation?
Yes.
Now, you talk there about the phenolic insulation being used for thermal performance in the third line from the bottom and the second line from the bottom there. Did you realise at the time that the Celotex product that was used as the main insulation, RS5000, was a PIR insulation, not a phenolic insulation? So it was a polyisocyanurate insulation.
No.
You weren't aware of that at the time?
No.
And then at paragraph 22, in the next paragraph of your statement, you say this in the first lines: as far as the manufacture of the cladding and insulation is concerned, I have no specific memory of this. Having read media reports and material related to this case, I understand that Celotex was used for the insulation and Rainabond aluminium composite material for the cladding. And then you also understand that Siderized products were used. Now, if we can turn back to the NBS specification, SEA 50169, page 73, and look at item 776 at the top of the page. Sorry, SEA 50169. That's it, thank you. So this is again, within the H92 section of the NBS specification.
Yes.
And here we can see item 776 is the thermal insulation. And we can see, if we keep reading down that after the second bullet point, there's a little indented line, and then it says product reference FR5000. Do you see that there?
Yes.
And above that was manufacturer Celotex Limited. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Do you remember noticing in the NBS specification that the insulation that had been specified for Grenfell Tower was the Celotex FR5000 product?
Not looking back on it, I can't remember, no.
And does it remain your evidence that you have no specific memory of the manufacturer of the insulation?
Up until until it came out in the media, I wouldn't have been able to tell you before that happened.
Now, we know that the product that was in fact used on the tower was RS5000, a Celotex product. Do you agree that there was therefore a change in the specification from FR5000 that we see here to RS5000?
Yes.
Do you have a memory of that occurring on the project, there being a change in the specification between FR and RS5000?
No.
Were you aware of anyone at Harley considering the suitability of the FR5000 product for the Grenfell refurbishment?
No.
Would you have thought that was part of Kevin Lamb's responsibility as project designer, to consider the suitability of FR5000?
I would have thought it was the responsibility of the architect and building control.
Does that mean that they could say, put anything on the building and Harley would just build it? I mean, how far does that go?
Generally, it goes that if they put something in the specification, we obtain the data sheets and submit them back for approval, and if they approve them, then we believe that they're right to be used, because in things like fire, there wasn't anyone working at Harley who was trained in that at that time.
But wouldn't you even...
So if it was something structural that I understood more about, I would challenge them on it and argue it if I believed that it was wrong. But when it's something that you're not trained in, you have to rely on the expertise of the people who are trained in it.
Does that mean that there wouldn't even have been a cursory examination within Harley of the fire performance of the material?
Not that it was required. I would do it on other projects, that I'd try and read it and see if it was my understanding of being compliant, but I'd always refer it back.
So did anyone do that on the Grenfell project? Did anyone do a cursory examination of the material specified for the insulation to check that it had basic compliance?
I think prior to, I think at the point that Harley was at when this was going on, this was always done early on because we had a technical manager who worked part of the estimating department who was trained in these things. And I think at this point that there wasn't anybody in the business who could do that. So we did it individually by satisfying ourselves as well as we could by passing it back. But I don't think there was a particular company policy that you had to follow.
So does that mean that, as far as you're aware, no cursory examination of the fire performance of these materials was done by Harley?
Not as far as I'm aware, no.
Can you just help me with this? When you say passing it back, can you just explain exactly what you mean, for example, in relation to insulation?
So it would be a prescriptive specification, and you would then go and obtain the data sheets from the supplier, and then you would send that to the client's design team and building control for approval.
And the client's design team in this case being?
Would be the architect, structural engineer, fire consultant.
And did you do that?
I wasn't the design manager on it. Oh, sorry, I wasn't the designer on it.
Do you know if anyone else did that?
No.
You don't know, or you know they didn't?
I don't know if they did or didn't.
All right, thank you. Sorry.
Did you ever tell Kevin Lamb that it was part of his responsibilities to be doing that?
I think because I'd worked with him before and that was what we'd done before, it was under the expectation that he knew that was what was required.
I see. Let's look at a document now relevant to the insulation. This is CEL 401237. So this is an email from Jonathan Room of Celotex to Ben Sharman at Harley, Curtain Wall, on the 6th of August 2014. So this is before Kevin Lamb's appointment, yes, when you are holding the fort, is that right, on the project?
Pardon?
You're holding the fort at this point, aren't you, on the design work, on the Grenfell project, August 2014?
July. Yeah, I'm not sure when we were talking to, yes, but yeah, I was holding the fort, as you put it.
So in the email, we can see that Jonathan Room says to Ben Sharman, "Hi Ben, good to speak to you again. I have the pleasure of informing you, as of yesterday, we have now launched the first PIR board to successfully meet the performance criteria in BR 135 for insulated rain screen cladding systems, therefore acceptable for use in buildings above 18 metres in height. I would like to come into the office when everyone is around to present formally the new product. In the meantime, if you would like me to run any U-value calculations, please let me know. Kind regards, Jonathan." Do you see that there?
Yes.
Now, were you aware before this time that the RS 5000 product was going to be launched? Did you have any awareness of that?
No.
Did Jonathan Room come in and formally present the new product to Harley?
I can remember that he used to come into the office quite a bit. I can remember that he used to come in and check that Grenfell was still using the Celotex product. I can't remember him specifically doing a presentation.
So you can't remember when any such presentation might have happened?
No, I mean, I was working a lot at Trinity Square and wasn't always in the office. I was based in London quite a lot.
Do you have a recollection of actually being present when Mr. Room came in to present the new product?
I don't remember any presentation, no.
We can see at paragraph 23 of your witness statement, if we pull this up, this is at HAR 30/10149, page 6. Paragraph 23, you say, "In relation to the use of Celotex, I do remember a representative of Celotex visiting Harley's offices a number of times to discuss the Celotex product. I cannot remember exactly what he said, but I do remember that part of the Celotex sales pitch was that Celotex could be used on buildings over 18 metres tall. I also remember the bright pink Celotex brochures which were handed out." Do you see that there?
Yes.
Now, can you remember which Celotex representative it was who visited the Harley offices a number of times?
It was Jonathan Room.
Yeah. And approximately how many times do you think he might have come in to discuss the Celotex product with Harley?
He used to come in every couple of weeks, so over a year it would be maybe sort of 30 times or something.
Okay. So quite frequently he was
Yeah,
there.
I mean, he did before, as I said before working for Celotex, he worked for a different company that was more aligned with what I did as a structural engineer, and I can't actually remember the point at which he changed companies, but we used to see him quite a bit.
So approximately how long had you known him for as of 2014? Can you remember? You say you knew him at a different company. Was that Hilti that he was at before?
Yes, it was.
And is that the company you knew him at?
Yes.
And can you remember how long before you'd known him for?
A number of years, because in my role, carrying out the structural design, had to specify the structural fixings, and I, more often than not, specify Hilti.
Yeah. And had you had a close professional working relationship with him on previous projects?
Yes.
You knew him well?
Yes.
Were you aware, when you were working on the Grenfell project, that Celotex FR5000 and RS5000 were marketed as different products, but were in fact comprised of the same materials?
I don't think I was overly aware that I wouldn't be able to look back and say that it was called RS5000. So I had no knowledge that there was two different ones.
So does it follow that you never asked anyone at Celotex if there were differences between the FR and the RS5000 products?
Yeah, I didn't know that the FR existed. Didn't know really what the RS was.
Going back to the meetings with Celotex about this launch of this new product, which you say you were aware of, you remember bright pink brochures that were handed out. Were you aware that this was being presented as a product for dedicated use on rain screen cladding projects?
No, I can just remember that it was something they said could be used over 18 metres.
Did they ever qualify that, you talk about it as a sales pitch that could be used on buildings over 18 metres. Did Celotex ever qualify that sales pitch in any way when discussing the project with you?
Not that I can remember, no.
Sorry, when discussing the product with you?
No.
Do you remember Celotex ever saying that FR5000 was not safe to use on buildings over 18 metres in height?
No.
What steps did you take to test and verify the sales pitch for the RS5000 to check that it could be used on buildings above 18 metres?
I can't remember using it on any of the projects that I was the designer on, so I didn't take any steps.
So you're not aware that any steps were taken on the Grenfell project to verify the sales pitch for the RS5000 as suitable for above 80 metres?
No.
Would you have expected Kevin Lamb to have checked the sales pitch that it could be used on buildings above 18 metres?
I would expect that he would have told the architect what product was going on there so that they could get that checked, and that Ryden would have been told what product was going on there so they could check with building control.
As far as you were concerned, did you just take Celotex's word for it that Celotex RS5000 could be used on buildings above 18 metres?
At the time, I wasn't using it on any of the projects I was working on, so I didn't question it.
But you're the design manager for the Grenfell project. Why would it not have occurred to you to have made sure that someone checked that that product was suitable for above 18 metres?
Because I was responsible for making sure that Kevin was keeping to programme. I wasn't educated in how to check fire compliance.
We'll see later that you do actually send an email in September 2014 about the insulation, attaching the data sheet for it and making comments on its fire performance. So if your role was solely about programme and structural matters, why would you have been doing that in September 14?
I can't remember, but I don't think it would have been in relation to Grenfell.
Okay, well, we'll come and look at that in due course. When Celotex came in to Harley, do you remember ever showing their representatives drawings of Grenfell Tower?
Not as far as I remember, no.
Do you think anyone else at Harley showed Celotex drawings of Grenfell Tower?
They may have done. I mean, to have got a price to have put in the budget, I would have thought that the estimating team would have discussed quantities and the building in that way.
Well, at the time when the budget was prepared, this RS 5000 product wasn't launched. So,
But if it had been in the specification, they must have had something to price against.
I see. Can you recall any discussions that Harley had with Celotex about the specific cladding system that was proposed to be used as at Grenfell?
I don't recall.
Now, can we turn to an email chain from May 2014? So, earlier in 2014, if we look at this, CEL 403119. And I want to start at the bottom of page 3, an email dated the 14th of May from a colleague of yours, Tim Bennett. This is to Kingspan's general email address in March 2014 at 13:20. And it's about the water resistance of the K15 product. And then if we go the next email up in this little chain and look at that, we can see Tim Bennett from Harley then emails on the 14th of May 2014, emails Jonathan Room, CCing you in relation to Wayland's house. Do you see that there?
Yes.
And he says, "Morning, John. Please see the below email. On our Wayland's house project, we have a K15 specified insulation to be installed behind the ACM rain screen. As per my email below, I've asked whether the K15 is suitable to an area which may be sat in water, and Kingspan have confirmed that the K15 is not suitable. Do you have an alternative product we can put forward?" Do you see that there?
Yes.
So that's copied to you in May 2014. You're asking Jonathan Room about an alternative product. And then if we go to the top of page 2, an email of the 14th of May at 10:38, we see there Mr. Jeremy Suttle, the Technical Services Officer of Celotex, to Tim Bennett. You're not copied in to this bit of the string, CCing Jonathan Room and saying, "Good morning, Tim. Can you please confirm the height of the building that the insulation will be used in?" Do you see that there?
Yes.
And then if we look at the middle of page 1, there's an email. Sorry, actually, I think below that, the details about the height of the building are provided. Yes, sorry, you see at the bottom of that, Tim Bennett goes back and says the building is 20 stories and 60 metres plus in total height. And then what we see immediately above that is Jeremy Suttle coming back and saying, "Thank you for confirmation. Unfortunately, in this case, we would not be able to provide a solution as Celotex is only tested up to 18 metres in height." Do you see that there?
Yes.
So this is before the launch of RS 5000 in August 14, a query from Harley about whether or not Celotex have a suitable insulation product in replacement of the K15. And Celotex are coming back and saying, no, because it's not tested up to 18 metres in height. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Now, did Mr. Bennett at Harley make you aware of this email string and the fact that Celotex insulation was not suitable for use above 18 metres?
No.
Were you aware of that from any other information or sources at the time?
No.
So you weren't aware, as at May 2014, that Celotex did not have a product suitable for over 18 metres?
No, I wasn't aware.
Now, if we then pick up the story again back in August and look at an email, CEL 30111960. This is an email from Jonathan Room to you on the 27th of August 2014. So this is after Kevin Lamb's appointment, which was around the 12th of August 2014. And he says, "Hi Dan, good to speak to you again as always. For now, here is all the info that I have on the RS5000 rain screen product for use over 18 metres. When you have a moment, please can you send me across some drawings and an idea of who you would look to use for the supply chain. Speak again in a couple of weeks." And then PS, has the Wayland's House ship sailed? Kind regards, Jonathan. And if we note, sorry, I should have noted in the subject at the top, that the subject is Grenfell Tower and also Hammersmith RS5000 data. Do you see that there?
Yes.
And we also see that a rain screen zip file is attached by Mr. Room to you at that point. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Now, we can see that this obviously followed a conversation between you and Mr. Room. Good, it says, "Good to speak to you again, as always." Can you remember what the purpose of that call was or anything about it?
I think generally he was always calling to make sure that they were still in specifications and that the specifications hadn't been changed by the architect. It's the general sort of way that the conversations went and what projects we had coming up.
If he was ringing to discuss the specifications on the Grenfell Tower project, can you remember what you said to him about that?
Probably would have said that it's still down as the Celotex product, I imagine. But
I thought you
can't
said
remember.
Sorry,
I
finish
can't remember. I'm assuming, to be honest.
I thought you said earlier that you weren't aware that it was the Celotex FR5000 product that had been specified.
Yeah, if you'd asked me before any of this happened, I wouldn't have been able to look back and remember what the product was.
But looking at this now, do you think it's likely that you discussed with Mr. Room what the specification for the installation at Grenfell Tower was?
Yeah, looking at this.
Yeah. Now, we know that we have the attachments in the zip file, and it included a pack of documents relevant to the RS5000 product. And I'm going to take you through a number of those documents. It included a Celotex product comparison sheet, an LABC certificate for the product, a BRE global test report, a rain screen cladding compliance guide, and a rain screen cladding specification guide. So a pack of documents is being sent to you by Mr. Room in that zip file. Can you recall reading any of those documents at this time?
I've looked at these from the other evidence and I can't remember having ever seen them at the time. I think, to be honest, those kinds of things I wasn't educated in, and so I tended to pass them on other projects. I would always pass them on to people who were educated in that way.
You said in your witness statement, and we looked at it earlier, that you remember the pink brochures.
Yes.
You remember the cover of the pink brochures. Does that mean you think you read those pink brochures?
Again, not in detail. The most I knew about at that point was probably U values. I understood what U values were and what U values needed to be achieved. But for anything else, I would have passed it on.
Were you aware that this was quite a significant development in terms of cladding insulation, the development of a Celotex product? that could be used on buildings above 18 metres. Do you remember being struck that that was an important development at the time?
I can remember at the time that Jonathan used to say that it was a very important development, but from my understanding in the industry, I didn't know it was an important development, but I took his word on it.
So you didn't know it was an important development. You didn't know that prior to that, K15 had been the only insulation product that had been regularly used on buildings above 18 metres that was of a phenolic or similar nature. Did you not know that K15 had often been specified in that way prior to this?
All I can remember from the time is Jonathan saying that this was the first product to be specified for use for over 18 metres. So I thought that it was the only one. I didn't know that K15 could be.
I see. You hadn't really thought about K15 before this?
No.
No. Okay. Did you pass these documents on to anyone else within Harley after they were sent to you?
I don't have any memory of it, I'm afraid.
Or to Studio E or Ryden?
If I'd been the designer on a project, that would have been my normal course of action. But I can't remember doing it on this one.
I see. Let's turn to the LABC Registered Details Certificate to start with. This is at CEL 709. Were you aware at this time of who the LABC were, Local Authority Building Control? Were you aware of that organisation?
No.
So that didn't mean anything to you?
No.
Now we can see at the top that it says, second line down in the table, RS5000 PIR Insulation Board. Do you see that there? PIR, do you see the reference to PIR at the top?
Yes.
Were you aware what PIR meant?
No.
So you didn't know it meant polyisocyanurate?
No.
Did you give any thought to what type of insulation this was when this pack of material came through?
I think that I just thought that it was a more highly performing insulation, and yeah, I think that was about it.
Okay. Under limitations of use, further down, you see that title on the left-hand side, four boxes down. It says, for use in rain screen wall construction, including above 18 metres height, the required thickness of board for a particular construction must be established with the use of the Celotex online calculator. Do you remember noting that?
No.
That first line there, it says, for use in rain screen wall construction, including above 18 metres height. Did you notice that at the time, that they were saying it could be used in buildings above 18 metres?
Yes. But not on this document.
Did you consider that this meant that the product could be used on any building over 18 metres, regardless of the other components in the external wall?
Yes.
Now, can I ask you to read the paragraph below? Under advice notes, it says Celotex RS5000 can be used with a variety of cladding systems, including masonry or rain screen systems, and can be fixed back to a structural steel frame with a sheathing board or direct to masonry. Do you see that there?
Yes.
And then if we keep going in that section, it says Celotex RS5000 has successfully tested to BS 84142 2005, meets the criteria set out in BR 135, and therefore is acceptable for use in buildings with stories above 18 metres in height. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Did you note that at the time, that it had been successfully tested to that test standard?
All I can remember is what was being told by their sales rep and what was on the outside of their pink brochure, that it was used, acceptable for use in buildings above 18 metres.
Is that all you recall about being told by their sales rep?
And that it was the first one that was, the first of that kind of high performance insulation that could be used in buildings over 18 metres.
Yeah. It ends there by talking about alternative compliance to ADB. Do you see that there?
Yes.
In that paragraph we were just reading. Did that mean anything to you at the time?
Alternative compliance wouldn't have meant anything to me at the time, but looking back on it, I imagine that was the desktop studies that people would sometimes mention, and you'd send it off to the design team to be checked.
Okay. It then says the product has been tested and achieves a class 0 spread of flame. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Do you remember noticing that at the time?
I can't remember.
Can you help us as to what you considered the relevance to be of the fact that the insulation had achieved class 0?
At the time, to me, class 0 meant that it couldn't catch fire.
So did you read the information about class 0 in this pack of information and conclude something from that?
I can't remember. I don't think so.
Again, we'll look at it in due course, but in September 14, you send an email saying that the insulation is class 0. So can you remember knowing at the time that piece of information?
If I sent an email, I must have looked at something to tell me that, yes.
Okay. Do you think that the insulation being class 0 affected the decision to use it on the Grenfell project?
Looking back on that period of time, I think that the classifications were misleading. I don't think that anybody fully understood what Class O meant, from the very highest, most qualified architects through to people like me, doing detailed design and structural engineering.
Let me put the question in a different way. Were you aware within Harley that the fact that the insulation was class 0 made a difference to it being selected for use on the Grenfell project?
No, because, as far as I was aware, it was prescriptive specification, so Harley wouldn't have looked at it as Class O and chosen it. They would have seen that it had been chosen and probably looked to see if they believed it met the requirements or not.
Okay. Let's look at another of the documents sent to you by Mr. Room on the 27th of August, the Celotex Rain Screen Cladding Specification Guide. This is CEL 6013. So here we've got the pink cover to this specification guide, which you say in your witness statement you do remember seeing. Is that right?
I remember the pink of it. I couldn't say that it was definitely this one.
Do you think you read this document at the time you were sent it by Mr. Room?
I don't think I would have. I think I would have he probably would have shown it to me and pointed out what he believed the key aspects were. But it wasn't my area of expertise.
Whose job was it on the Grenfell project to read this Celotex specification guide for the RS 5000 insulation?
Within Harley, I don't know.
You don't know?
No.
So you didn't think that Kevin Lamb read this?
If Kevin had satisfied himself that the product had been checked by the architect and building control, I don't believe he would need to read it.
Okay. Now, if we go on within this document at page 5, we can see, if we look at the top of the page, we've got a section for fire performance. It says there, fire performance rain screen installation, Celotex RS5000 is Class 0 fire rated as described by the National Building Regulations. And it talks about 2 tests that it's passed there. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Or one it's passed and the other one it's got a classification for it, just to be accurate. So did you notice the reference to Class 0 in this specification guide at the time?
As you said, by the email that you've mentioned, I must have noticed it at some point.
Yeah.
But I have no memory of it.
Okay. And then for building above 18 metres, further down that column, it says Celotex RS5000 has been successfully tested to BS8414. And then it explains what that test method is. Meets the criteria set out in BR135 and is therefore acceptable for use in buildings above 18 metres in height. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Again, can you recall reading that in this guide?
No, I can't recall reading it in the guide. I recall being told it and having it pointed out to me, but I had no knowledge of what BS8414 was, or BR135. And if I'd been shown this on another project, I would have sent it off to others to check. So does it follow that you didn't form a view about whether this meant that the RS5000 could be used on Grenfell Tower? No, I wouldn't have formed a view on it because I wasn't educated on it.
Now, this guide set out the nature of the system that had been tested. If we go immediately below and look at the bottom of that page, sorry, I think we've gone too far down. I'm sorry. Immediately below. Yes, there you see it. You say the system tested to BS84142 for 2005 was as follows. Do you see that there?
Yes.
And we can see that they've told you what the system was, and it begins with 12mm fibre cement panels. Do you remember noticing in either this specification guide or indeed any of the other literature about RS5000 that it had been tested on a specific system, cladding system? Do you remember noticing that?
No.
You weren't aware of that at the time?
No.
So you weren't aware that it had been tested with fibre cement panels as the rain screen panel in those tests?
No.
So you didn't notice that that was different to the rain screen system at Grenfell, which had aluminium composite material panels. You didn't notice that?
No.
Now, you talked just a moment ago about what you'd been told by the Celotex representative. Did the Celotex representative ever tell you anything about the specific system that had been tested? Did he go into those details?
No.
And then if we look at the column on the right, we could go back up to the top of the page. In the third paragraph down on the right, we get this. It says the fire performance and classification report for Celotex RS5000 only relates to the components detailed above. Any changes to the components listed will need to be considered by the building designer. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Do you remember reading that statement or any similar statement in any of this Celotex RS5000 literature?
No.
Had you read that, who would you have thought needed to consider it? So it talks about the building designer.
The building designer to me would be the architect.
Let's turn to another of the documents. This was the Rain Screen Cladding Compliance Guide. And this is CEL 6012. And it was another document you were provided with by Mr. Room on the 27th of August 2014. Again, this has got the pink cover. Do your answers kind of follow over that you don't recall reading this in any detail at the time?
No, because it wasn't what I was trained in.
If we can go to page 3 in the far right-hand column. we get more information about the performance criteria here. There's a discussion about BR135, and again, we get the statement in that final paragraph: the classification applies only to the system as tested and detailed in the classification report. It can only cover the details of the system as tested. It cannot state what is not covered. When specifying or checking a system, it is important to check that the classification documents cover the end-use application. Do you see that there?
Yes.
And again, is it your evidence that you don't recall ever being aware of that caveat in this pack of information?
No, I don't recall that, no.
And if you go to page 4, in the middle of the page, we can see at the top of the page that the system tested is again listed. But this time, we've also got a diagram of the system below that. If we can pull up that diagram, exactly. So there we can see the system that was tested, and you can see on the second label down, 12mm Marley Eternit Natura panel. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Would that have been something you were familiar with at the time, a Marley Eternit Natura panel?
It's not a product that I'd used before.
So it wasn't a product that you used on a rain screen system before?
No.
And is it your evidence that you didn't notice at the time that the system that was tested was with that product that you didn't recognise?
No, I didn't notice that.
And then if we go back up the page again, sorry, we've already seen the warning, sorry. Did you ever discuss anything about the Marley Eternit Natura panel with Mr. Room?
I don't believe so, no.
You don't remember him mentioning that that was the panel that had been used in the test?
No.
Did you ever have any doubts in your mind about whether the system ought to be used at Grenfell? Or was that simply something that you just didn't apply your mind to?
Yeah, because it was relating to fire performance and thermal performance that I wasn't trained in. You know, I applied my mind to the structural performance on Grenfell.
Can we also turn now to the BRE Global Test Report that Mr. Room sent over? This is CEL 6011. It's dated the 11th of August 2014. Can you see that? That's the BRE, the cover for this test report, and it's the classification report in accordance with BR 135. Do you remember ever reading this document at the time?
No.
If we go to page 2 at item 2.1, it sets out the full details of the system that's tested there. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Again, does that bring back any memory of looking at that?
No.
And if we go to page 4, paragraph 5.3, under the heading Field of Application, do you see it says there, this classification is valid only for the system as installed and detailed in section 2 of this classification report and the associated details found in the related test reports. Do you see that there?
Yes.
And again, is it your evidence that you didn't notice that at the time? You didn't read that?
No.
Did you at any time query with Celotex or anyone else whether there was a desktop study to support the use of RS5000 for the system at Grenfell?
On Grenfell, no. I know that I sent other desktop studies off for other jobs, but I can't remember what products they were for.
Did you ever check on Grenfell whether anyone else was asking for a desktop study or other assessment to support the system at Grenfell?
No.
Whose responsibility did you think that was?
If the product had been specified by the architect, which I believed it had been, then I believe it would have been their responsibility to ensure that the desktop study had been carried out.
But Mr. Anketell-Jones, we've seen that the product that was specified was the FR5000 product, and we've seen Celotex saying in May 2014 that that product wasn't suitable for use above 18 metres. is it your evidence that you simply weren't aware that this was a different product?
Yeah, I wasn't aware of that there was a difference in the products, and looking back on it, I thought we were just following the specification, and in which case I would have thought that it had been checked fully by the architect.
But how could you have thought that when you said you knew this was a new product that was being launched, the first product to be used above 18 metres?
I had no concept that it hadn't already been checked through with desktop studies at that point. I didn't realise that the timelines worked that way. I thought that it had already been signed off.
Okay. Can I ask you to turn to Mr. Ray Bailey's witness statement? This is HAR 30101884, page 42. And look at paragraph 170. Do you see that there? So he's asked the question, did Harley rely on any advice from third parties about the compliance of the design? And he says, as described previously, we took into consideration advice from Studio E in respect to the position of the cavity barriers, Siderise in respect of the confirmation of the specification of the cavity barriers, and from manufacturers in relation to the suitability of the Rainabond ACM and Celotex RS5000. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Now, did you ever take any specific advice from Celotex about the use of RS5000 on the Grenfell building?
No, not that I remember.
Now, if we look at paragraph 42 of your witness statement, this is HAR 30100149 at page 10. 42. You say there, this type of phenolic insulation was used very frequently at the time. The main ones were Kingspan and Celotex. At the time, Celotex described it as class naught and claimed that it was suitable for use on buildings over 18 metres, and were pushing it heavily, as I have described in answer to question 4B, but they were not drawing people's attention to the exact configuration that allowed it to be used on buildings over 18 metres. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Now, can you explain why you're saying there that they were not drawing people's attention to the exact configuration, given the documents that we've just looked at?
Because when I look back on it now, having read those documents, I have no recollection of them drawing our attention to that.
Are you saying that you personally didn't have the exact configuration drawn to your attention? Is that why you're saying that?
Yes.
Are you saying that you personally were confused by the Celotex marketing literature as to what compliance standards the product had actually achieved?
I think at the time I didn't have enough knowledge on it to even probably be confused. I would take what they were saying and then I would pass it on to people who understood it.
Yeah, if you didn't actually read any of the documents I just took you to, and I think that was your evidence, how could you have become confused?
That's my point. I don't think I understood enough about it to even be confused. I think with other things that you're educated on, you can become confused about it and not understand what people are going at. But on something where you literally have no training, you literally just take what you're given. You may not necessarily believe it or, approve it yourself, but you take what you're given, you say, okay, I hear what you're saying, you pass it on to the people who do understand that for them to approve.
And on Grenfell, who were you passing it on to the people who do understand it for them to approve?
If I had been the designer, I would have been passing it on to the architect and building control.
So does that mean you expected Kevin Lamb to be passing on this kind of information to the architect and building control?
I would expect Kevin to have satisfied himself that if that it had been signed off by the architect and building control.
Right. Can we look at another document now from August? So the day after you were sent this pack of documents from Celotex, that was on the 27th of August 14, it appears that you had a discussion with them about appropriate U values. Can we go to CEL 401451? And this is an extract again from the Celotex Salesforce entry, and we'll need the offline version, sorry. So I want to look at the entry, that first one on that page there that we can see. It's dated the 28th of August 2014, and it's about Grenfell Tower. Can you see it says related to?
Yeah.
Do you see that? And it's assigned to someone called Mark Willoughby, I think within Celotex. And then comments, it says refurb of Grenfell Tower, 0.15 U value, and then it says this: Dan has calculated using FR, but stated that he needs to use RS 5000, 150 millimetre, due on site in October. We'll recalculate using our software instead of Bulldesk to make sure everything is in order. Do you see that there?
Yeah, it's built.
So, focusing in on that, do you remember who you might have had a discussion with at Celotex at this time?
I don't recall it. I recall that we used to have a piece of software in the office called Bulldesk, and you could put in the products that you were using to calculate a U value. I would have thought maybe I called Celotex to get them to check it or something.
But you can't recall who you spoke to at Celotex?
No.
Can you help us with the comment, Dan has calculated using FR, but stated that he needs to use RS 5000? Do you see that there?
Yes.
What's your understanding of what FR means there?
My understanding now is it was a different brand name for the same product.
So could it mean Dan has calculated using FR 5000, but stated that he needs to use RS 5000? Do you see that there?
Yeah, the software came with a set number of products in it, so it may not have had the RS 5000 in it.
Yeah.
It just works off a figure, so each product has a U value performance or a thermal resistance, and so you just select one that has a similar thermal resistance to the one you want to roughly calculate the thickness.
Looking at this now, does that mean that as at this point, August 2014, you must have been aware that it was FR 5000 that had been specified as the product originally by the architects?
I don't know. Either the product wasn't available in the software, or I just had a quick look at the NBS specification and put in what was stated there.
Can you help us? Is it at this point that it was decided that the specification should change from FR to RS 5000? You're recorded as stating there, stated that he needs to use RS 5000. Was that a decision that you had taken?
No. I have no recollection of changing it or that it was even different.
So do you think this is inaccurate? Or can you explain why it says stated that he needs to use RS 5000?
I can't remember. I'd be guessing.
Do you know who made the decision to use the RS 5000 product on the Grenfell project?
No, I can't.
Can you help us as to in what circumstances the RS 5000 came to be used on the Grenfell project?
Only by guessing.
Oh, we don't want you to guess, but did you ever check with Ryden or Studio E that they were happy with the RS 5000 product?
No.
whose job within Harley would it have been to have checked with Ryden and Studio E that they were happy with the RS 5000 product?
Project manager or project designer.
So who was that in Harley then?
It would have been Ben or Kevin.
Ben or Kevin? Do you remember having a discussion with Kevin Lamb at which you talked about the RS 5000 Celotex product, the new Celotex product, with Kevin Lamb?
No.
So how would Kevin have been aware of that product?
I don't know.
Now, if we can look forward in the chronology now, if we can go to another document, CEL 6014. And if we look at the bottom of page 1, CEL 6014, so at the very bottom of that page, we can see on the 18th of September 2014, so this is later in time, so kind of 3 weeks or so later, we can see that he says, "Morning, Dan. Please can you let me know your availability to discuss Grenfell Tower and the other projects in your pipeline? Kind regards, Jonathan." Do you see that there?
Yes.
And we can see from the top email on page 1 that he followed up with a further request on the 17th of November 2014. "Hi, Dan. Would you be around on Thursday, Friday to catch up regarding your current future projects? Kind regards, Jonathan." Do you see that there?
Yes.
Now, do you think it's likely that you spoke to Mr. Room in between those two emails, between September and November? I think you said earlier that he was coming in on a kind of fortnightly basis. Is it likely that you had discussions with him prior to November?
It's likely, but I can't remember.
Okay. And we can see from the emails that a meeting did take place on the 24th of November 2014, because that evening Mr. Room sent you an email. If we look at that, this is at CEL 6018. So this is, if we could just blow up the top half of that email. Thank you. This is from Jonathan Room to you. And just note there, no one else is copied into that email. So there's no Mark Stapley, no one else at Harley, just you. Celotex project review. And he says, "Hi, Dan. I spoke with Mark and the team regarding a few projects." Now, would that be Mark Stapley that he'd spoken to?
I don't know, to be honest. Could have
And
been
then-
either of them.
Sorry.
It could have been either of them.
Yeah. So Mark Harris or Mark Stapley.
Yes.
And then we've got Grenfell Tower. When we last looked at this, we came to a conclusion of using 3,000 metres squared of 150 millimetre RS 5000. Is this still so? Mark's drawings were showing a mix of 100 millimetres and 160 millimetres. Do you see that there?
Yes.
So this email, would you agree, suggests that you have previously looked at the quantity and thickness of RS 5000 that you would need to use for the Grenfell project.
Yes.
Do you agree?
Yes.
You've sat down with Mr. Room and you've talked about that.
Yes.
Now, given what you've said about the limitations of your role, can you explain why you were having those discussions with Mr. Room?
I think because of our relationship from his previous role, that it was just a useful way of him to be able to find out what work was coming up and what he could sort of start putting into his sales figures were predicted.
Because this is about the insulation, isn't it? So it can't have had anything to do with the structural performance, can
No,
it?
but based on our previous relationship, we had a relationship where he could come in and talk to me, and it was a way of him being able to predict what was coming up in his sales forecasts.
Does that mean that on the Grenfell project, because of the relationship you had with Jonathan Room at Celotex, that you did get involved in helping select the RS 5000 insulation for the project?
No, just helped him in anticipating what sort of projects were coming up and what sort of quantities those products might have on them if their insulation was to be used.
But it's much more specific than that, isn't it? You're actually looking at very specific quantities and thicknesses of a specific Celotex product for the Grenfell Tower project. Isn't that exactly what we see here?
Yes, but that's the kind of information he would be looking for to understand what sort of work was potentially coming up.
So is what you're saying that you anticipated he would have further discussions with somebody else at Harley about whether to choose RS 5000 on the Grenfell project?
As far as I understood, the RS 5000 was always chosen. Even looking back on it now, I come to the same conclusion that the difference between the two products, there wasn't one, and at some point someone must have said you can't use that one, but the RS 5000 is the equivalent.
I see. But that does suggest you were aware that you were changing products.
Honestly, I was not aware that it was changing products.
Okay. Do you remember which drawings you had discussed and looked at with Mr. Room? He says, when we last looked at this, we came to the conclusion of using, is this still so? Mark's drawings were showing a mix of. Can you recall what drawings were reviewed by Celotex?
No, Mark must have shown him some when I was working in London.
So you can't help as to whether they showed the entire wall build-up of the system at Grenfell?
No.
We know that the Harley drawings did not themselves identify the Rainabond ACM product. Do you know whether Jonathan Room was ever shown the Harley specification, which did show that product, or was otherwise told that it was going to be Rainabond ACM?
No, I don't.
Did you or anyone else at Harley ever tell Jonathan Room specifically that the rain screen you were proposing to use on Grenfell was a Rainabond ACM?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Did you have discussions with Mr. Room about whether RS 5000 should be used on Grenfell Tower?
As I wasn't the designer on the project, I don't believe I would have discussed it with him in direct relation to Grenfell. I would have discussed it in more general sense, that it was appropriate for use over 18 metres. But for any of the projects that I was working on and that he was putting it forward, I would have sent it off to that design team.
So you don't accept that this email suggests you did have a specific discussion about the use of RS 5000 for the Grenfell project?
It does discuss that it was going to be used on Grenfell. And he would have been aware it was going to be used on Grenfell. Sorry, I'm not... What was the question specifically?
So you're not accepting that this email suggests you did have a specific discussion about the use of RS 5000 for the Grenfell project?
No, he would have been aware it was being used on Grenfell.
Did Mr. Room ever expressly provide you with an assurance that the RS 5000 product was suitable for use in the specific system proposed for use at Grenfell Tower?
I never discussed the specific suitability of RS 5000 with him.
Did, to your knowledge, Mr. Room ever conduct any assessment of the cladding system at Grenfell as a whole and confirm that RS 5000 was safe to use in that application?
Not that I'm aware of.
Did they provide you with any detailed analysis to explain why they came to the conclusion that it was an acceptable use of the product?
Not that I'm aware of.
In Mr. Bailey's evidence last week, he indicated that he thought there had been an assessment by Celotex that it was a suitable product for use at Grenfell. Is your evidence that you weren't aware of any such assessment?
If I'd been I wasn't aware of it for this project. On all other projects, I would have always been checking that it had been done by the architect and building control.
Were you ever involved in promoting RS5000 for use on Harley projects?
I don't believe I ever tried to promote it on any projects.
What about specifically for Grenfell Tower? Do you remember ever supporting within Harley the use of RS5000 on the Grenfell project?
No. It was a prescriptive performance from my point of view. It was already specified.
Now, in your witness statement, you said that you attended 2 design team meetings in August 2014 and October 2014. The minutes of the design team meeting for August 2014 do show you there. The minutes for the October 2014 meeting do not show you there, but you are at the September 2014 design team meeting. Is it possible that you've simply got confused about that?
It was a long time ago.
Yeah. Let's look at the minutes of that September 2014 design team meeting. It's RYD 17128 at page 4. Sorry, we probably ought to look at the front of those meeting minutes just to check that you were there. Yes, so you can see it's held on site on the 2nd of September 2014 at 10 a.m. and you are there in the present list on the left-hand side. Do you see that?
Yes.
Together with Kevin Lamb. Can you see that?
Yes.
And if we go to page 4, item 3.62, we can see U values being discussed. Do you see that there?
Yes.
And it says U values were discussed with SL, I think that must be Simon Lawrence, is that right?
I presume so, yeah.
With Simon Lawrence asking how the figures in the spec were arrived at and whether they need to be rechecked from an M&E and insulation point of view. Is the insulation thickness show on architect drawings correct? And then we see this, it says DAJ, that would be you, wouldn't it, Daniel Anketell-Jones?
Yes.
Confirmed that he had checked them, but with the assumption that Ride and Maintenance Limited were fitting further insulation internally. And then Simon Lawrence didn't believe this was part of the spec. All parties agreed to check their documents. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Does this mean that you had checked the U values for the insulation?
So that would have been with that build desk software that we looked at earlier.
So it was part of your role, was it, to check U values and thermal performance of the insulation?
I don't think it was specifically part of my role. It was just trying to double check on this particular project to help them out.
Did this checking process of the U values prompt any consideration of whether the product was suitable from other perspectives, such as a fire safety perspective?
No, it would have been just checking whether the U value that they were trying to achieve could be achieved with the thickness of insulation that they were specifying.
Did you ever consider whether another insulation product, such as a mineral wool insulation product, might have been more appropriate for the Grenfell project?
No, because it had been specified by the architect. It was a prescriptive specification. We weren't trying to put forward other products, in my mind.
And then just finally on this set of minutes, and then I think we can break. The post-meeting note, that PMN, do you see at the bottom of that page?
Yeah.
It says there, Max Fordham tender U-value document was shared to team via email. External wall construction was checked against all tender information and all information shared. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Now, were you involved in that checking process for the external wall construction?
Not that I remember.
So you don't recall checking that construction against the tender information?
No.
Do you know whether anyone else at Harley did, as recorded in the minutes?
No. I mean, reading this, it looks more like a check that was carried out with the design team.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, I think that would be a good
Good
moment.
point.
Thank
Yes.
you.
Well, Mr. Anketell-Jones, it's time we had a break for lunch. We'll stop now. We'll start again at 2 o'clock, please. So please don't talk to anyone about your evidence or anything to do with it over the break. And we'll see you back here at 2 o'clock, please. All right. Thank you. Good. 2 o'clock, please.
Thank you.
Thank you.